right, governance. Time to govern. I hope everyone files back into the room because Kain is a DeFi god that I think a lot of people in this room know well, follow him on Twitter. So this is the talk to hear. We got a lot of people filing back in, which is great. I hope also if you're in the room, quick plug, if you are in the crypto world, I hope you know Decrypt and read us for all your news. So let's get started this way. You know, even though this is an audience of probably DeFi degens, people who know Synthetix, I never want to assume. We got some TradFi types, we probably have some marketing folks and people newish to crypto. So just give everyone the Synthetix 101. How does Synthetix work? How would a regular person use it?
Yeah, so Synthetix started out as a stablecoin. In 2018, we realized that like a single US dollar denominated stablecoin is probably not going to be something that's going to be able to compete with like USDC or even DAI at the time. And so we pivoted and we moved to this platform that supported not just a dollar-denominated stablecoin, but stablecoins in like multiple denominations. So we have like a Bitcoin stablecoin, an ETH stablecoin, and a bunch of other assets. And so for the average person, what can you do with it? You can go to either Ethereum or Optimism, and you can hold a token that lets you, say, track the price of Bitcoin.
And we have to talk a lot about stablecoins and get into that because stablecoins have become kind of a hot and controversial topic. But next question, let's give a nod to our hosts here at Chainlink. How does Synthetix use and integrate Chainlink? Because there's a real connection there.
Yeah, so the connection is very deep. It goes back to like mainnet, basically, right? Like we were the first people to integrate Chainlink. And the reason why we did that was that back when we started Haven, the stablecoin project, there wasn't really an Oracle solution that was out there that was in production. And so we kind of didn't have a choice, but it was still a bad idea. We probably shouldn't have done it. We actually built our own Oracle. And so for, I think, probably like a year, maybe almost 18 months, we ran our own Oracle, which was an absolute nightmare. It was literally, you couldn't sleep at night. It was terrible. And then we, in 2019, met the Chainlink team, and we'd been looking, for a solution to kind of move away from this, independently run Oracle that we were maintaining. And we spoke to them for about, I think, like 3 months or 6 months, and started this collaboration where we basically worked together with them to kind of get the Oracle network onto mainnet, and we're the first ones to integrate it. We built a bunch of aggregation contracts for Synthetix for all of the Forex currencies. And then I think about 6 months later, we migrated the entire thing. So at that point, we had like maybe 15 or 20 different assets that Chainlink was supporting for us, which, that day, I still remember it very vividly. I think a lot of the Synthetix OGs remember it very vividly, that it was just like this sigh of relief of like, thank God someone else is managing this for us. And it's been amazing since then. Obviously, we work really closely with Chainlink to get onto like Optimism, which is a layer 2 scaling network that we also support. So yeah, it's a very deep and long-standing relationship. And there's some other cool stuff like CCIP and various other things that we work really closely with Chainlink to kind of continue to innovate on.
How many assets now on Synthetix are tradable?
It's a good question.
A lot more than 20.
Yeah, I think like it might be even like 40, but there's also different flavors as well, right? So you have like spot assets, you have futures, you've got assets that allow you to take like a short position, and then on top of that, you have now probably like 8 or 10 protocols that have built like as like another layer on top of Synthetix. So that supports like options and options vaults. There's some other stuff like pari-mutual markets. So there's a ton of different assets within like the Synthetix ecosystem that are supported now by Chainlink and
When we're talking about options trading, kind of relatively sophisticated trading mechanisms for people and investors, I mean, we have to talk about the current bear market, right? I mean, and it's a time when some people are still managing to make money somehow, but kind of everything is down bad. And not just in the crypto world. I mean, especially today, if you have followed the news, there's a lot going on in the global economy, non-crypto. But focusing on our world, I mean, we are kind of deep in a crypto winter. How has that affected Synthetix, either user onboarding, volumes, your kind of sentiment and temperature about the space right now?
I mean, Synthetix came out of the last bear market, right? Like, we were, I think, one of the protocols that made a bunch of changes in early 2019 that kind of kicked off the whole DeFi summer thing. So, we started yield farming with Uniswap, which was, I think, one of the kind of early composability experiments that worked really well. And then the staking rewards contract is, I think, still probably the most used contract, in DeFi. So I think for us, we look at a bear market as an opportunity to just slow down, really think about things, and this is why governance is important as well, right? Governance just gets thrown out the window during a bull market, right? It's no one cares. It's like, let's just try and move as quickly as possible, do the dumbest possible things.
Only.
Exactly, and so all of that stuff that is really critical, but takes a lot of kind of thoughtfulness and experimentation, just gets blown away. And so in a bear market, you kind of sit there and go, okay, let's take stock of what's happened over the last 18 months. There's a whole bunch of really amazing things that have happened, that have been built, but most people in the room, including myself, are not even aware of all the stuff that happened over the last 18 months, right? And so in a bear market, you have a chance to kind of do some more research, slow things down, and really focus on the kind of fundamental aspects, and governance is one of those things that I think there's a bunch of other things, but I think governance is one of those things that hopefully in this bear market we will come out of with a much better platform.
Yeah, let's get into governance in more depth. And a good place to start is actually exactly a year ago, you're at a different conference, and you said that it's kind of like an undiscussed secret in the industry that the governance mechanisms we have are pretty terrible. You said DeFi governance pretty terrible.
Yeah.
1 year later, do you feel like that's changed? Has it gotten any better? I mean, certainly it's something we talk about more, but it's not the easiest thing to just fix, especially when people just, like you said, launch the token, when token, up only, and then oops, we lost our shirts because a lot of these projects and companies were just way out over their skis and thought it would only be a bull market forever.
I think governance is actually worse today, unfortunately, a year later, which is maybe a bit of a controversial take, but the issue is that, again, the incentives are misaligned in a bull market, right? The incentives are there to, do things like governance theater, et cetera. And, the tools that were developed, Snapshot's a great example, right? So, you have this issue where I'd say the vast majority of DeFi protocols, or even, Web3, more general Web3 protocols, are governed by multisigs. And multisigs are very problematic because they're this discretionary component that exists within a protocol where you might have like 4, 5, maybe if you're lucky, 10 people that are usually unelected, that are the ones that are actually making the changes to the protocol. And so Snapshot, this is like the perfect bull market solution to this problem, right? It's like, let's not actually go and solve the underlying issue of multisigs controlling all these things. Let's put this really nice shiny veneer on top of it so it looks good and looks all legitimate.
Pretty UX.
Exactly.
Yeah. Let's make sure everyone knows what Snapshot is. That's what DAOs use for voting.
So Snapshot basically is a signaling mechanism, right? So, if we're all in here and we want to like agree on what, some decision that we want to make, right? You go to Snapshot and you vote with your tokens and it sends a signal. But where does the signal go? The signal goes ideally to the multisig, right? But the multisig is not responsible at all to that signal. The multisig could say, no, we're not going to do this, right? And so you have this like core within a lot of DeFi that is discretionary, and then you've got this like shiny UX of like, hey, we're all voting and it's cool and we're all doing the right thing.
We're doing crypto governance.
We're doing crypto, exactly. We're doing crypto governance, congratulations. And so I think that like actually finding a way for the signal to be directly connected. And there are certain things out there like the compound governance module, but we really haven't invested as an industry, like I say we collectively have not invested the time or effort over the last 18 months to actually fix this problem. And so my strong hope is out of this bear market we will get much more robust solutions so that we can get rid of this multi-sig problem and come out into the next bull market with a much more reasonable governance framework.
So you think governance has actually gotten worse in the past year, but the bear market might help?
Yeah, hopefully.
Okay, so let's just continue with the bear market. Great.
Yeah.
I hope it lasts longer. When we talk about, you use the phrase governance theater, and I've certainly heard the phrase decentralization theater as well. What are examples of governance theater? I mean, we talked about the problems with Snapshot, But are there recent kind of news moments when it was like, nope, that is not really quite what we were trying to accomplish here?
I mean, I think you see governance theater pops up in a bunch of different ways, right? Where you have a system that looks like it's being controlled by token holders, but actually is being controlled by like a small group of unelected people or unaccountable people, right? And so like ultimately what governance theater comes down to is you have some discretion where there's like some system within a protocol where the token holders cannot control it, right? And so like this comes up a lot in treasuries, right? So you have treasuries that are controlled by, 2 or 3 people potentially in a project, especially if they're a non. And the token holders are saying, well, hang on a second, like how are we actually distributing these resources? We've got this big treasury, we want to allocate resources, we want to have some say in how these resources are allocated, and yet weird decisions are being made and we have no like recourse to actually stop it. And so instead of saying, okay, let's find a way to work out what token holders want, instead you come up with like some convoluted scheme which makes it look legitimate, and like you have a bunch of like proposals and a nice website and all of these things. All of that is like governance theater, right? At the crux of the matter is like, how do we ensure that token holders, the people who own the project, the people who control the project, the people who should be making the decisions, are able to very clearly express their preferences as to what should happen within the project. Like that is what decentralized governance is, and anytime you break that, you're basically creating some kind of governance theater.
And that's especially problematic because in many cases, the allure of being in a DAO is this ideal of join the group and you have a say, you have a vote. However many tokens you have, you actually have a voice in influencing the decisions of the DAO. But of course, in many cases, it's really 5 people who founded it have most of the tokens, and thus most of the voting power.
Yeah, and so there's obviously like plutocratic issues as well, right? So Maker is probably the best example, and I feel bad because I always use Maker as like the counterexample of governance. But like Andreessen controls, on some very real sense, Maker governance, right? And so this has a chilling effect. If you have a bunch of people who deeply care about a project and are really engaged, and then there's one stakeholder that for whatever some historical reason 7 years ago they put a bunch of money into the thing and have 15% of the token supply or whatever, collectively all of the people in a Discord cannot actually override the decision of this one party, right? And so it ends up being the situation where people go, well, why am I even bothering to vote, right? Like, we already have this issue.
Sounds like real life.
Well, like we have this issue in democracy where people are like, oh, what's the point? Like, I'm one marginal vote, right? If there's some person who had 15 million votes, that makes it even crazier, right? You're like, so I've got one marginal vote, but then there's one person running around who has 15 million votes. Like, why am I bothering to do this, right? It just exacerbates the problem significantly.
Yeah, it's the other time that this comes up, it comes up involving like bad actors, right? Which is, we've written about this at Decrypt, and these tend to be the examples that get a lot of play because regular folks, I've told myself to stop using the word normies, which is an industry term for non-crypto people. It feels like we should stop using that word. But non-crypto natives, tend to see these stories and they get amplified. For example, ENS, the Ethereum Name Service DAO, voting out a pretty prominent member because of an offensive tweet. Regardless of what you think of the tweet. You mentioned MakerDAO. There was an example where MakerDAO basically voted as a DAO to get rid of its entire marketing social media team because people didn't think they were doing a good enough job. And yet, as I always say about DAOs, I think we talked about this last week at Mainnet a little bit, it's kind of a misnomer. I mean, they're not decentralized when they first start, which is no one's fault, but someone has to create the DAO. It can't just appear and be decentralized. And then the A in DAO, well, they're not autonomous. They're not running on smart contracts. They're running from human beings voting. And so, how is that something that we can fix when it comes to dealing with the gray area of judgment calls about members?
I think, it's just that we didn't really understand what we were actually doing. Like, we kind of defined this DAO thing, right? Like, if you go back to the DAO, right? That was like the first, I guess, real-world example of like a large-scale system, right? And obviously, it didn't end that well. But I don't think that's like necessarily like something that invalidates DAOs as a concept. But I think when you imagine, and this happens in crypto all the time, it happens in all kinds of industries. You start off with this ideal, and this system that you imagine, like this is what it's going to look like, and then the real world has a way of just being very different to what you expect, right? And so we start off with all these assumptions and expectations or whatever, and then the world invalidates them, and it takes a while sometimes for us to like realign what our expectations are. And so I think like what a DAO is very different to like what a lot of us expected a DAO would be, and that's okay because we were wrong. And like what a DAO can be and what it will eventually be still like ultimately embodies this idea that decentralized governance is a better way of making decisions than centralized governance, right?
You still feel that way?
I still feel that way. I deeply feel that way. I just think that like it's a hard problem and it's a bit path dependent and you kind of go the wrong direction and so the more like iteration and experimentation we have, the better off we'll be. Right? But we will eventually get to a point, I think, where we've got the right frameworks in place, we've got the right thought processes, and collectively we all understand how to actually approach this problem, and we will be able to outcompete a centralized hierarchical organization. Like I genuinely believe that that is what will happen, but it's just not going to happen in 20 minutes. Like it's going to take time.
How long will it take, and do people in crypto have the patience to wait around to see it work?
Well,
especially it's an industry that there's so much vitriol and skepticism that and then something like Terra happens, the collapse of Terra, and it allows people who already say all of crypto is a house of cards, it's a scam, it's a fraud, to point and say, see.
I mean, the irony there is Terra was completely centralized. It was all governance theater. Like, there was no actual governance in Terra at all, right? And so, I think that it doesn't invalidate decentralized governance. It actually validates the thesis that centralized governance is bad, right? It was just a company, I mean, not even, it was like one person as a dictator running.
Two.
And like, oh, yeah, sure. But like, it's like kind of this situation where like, we understand that individual people do not make good decisions, right? But then there's agency as well, right? So you need people who are responsible, and you don't want this kind of diffusion of responsibility. So you need to find a middle ground between having some unelected dictator control everything and having just, like pure direct token voting, right? Like there's some middle ground there, and with the right systems in place, I think that the decision making that you can get out of a community that's highly engaged, that has a process and a platform to be able to express their preferences, can do a better job, make less mistakes. It might be slower, but that's okay. Like, you say, people, do we have the patience, right? In a bear market, we have the patience. The people who are still here in a bear market have the patience. I mean, if you don't, like, I don't know what to tell you. You should get more patience. If you don't, like, work on your patience, right? But like, we're all still here, right? And we can, if it takes us 2 years to figure this out, it takes us 2 years. In a bull market, no one has any patience, right? If this was a year ago, I'd be like, you honestly, do whatever you want, like go on YOLO shitcoins. But like, literally, like here now, the people in this room, we should be thinking about solving this problem. Like, this is a problem that is solvable. We can do it.
Man, this is really fun. We're really getting into the heart of it now. I mean, one tension that I think we see is, you're, in a way, it sounds like you're describing the wisdom of crowds, right? It shouldn't just be one person, and you get, one leader who's just off making their own decisions, and it's better when it's a group. At the same time, in crypto, every project, every protocol still has the one person who's like the face of it. I mean, you're the face of Synthetix. I mean, Sergey is the person first associated with Chainlink, Vitalik and Ethereum, and that's okay. I mean, Shapeshift, if people are kind of OGs and remember Shapeshift, I mean, they became a DAO instead of a company. It's still, Eric Voorhees is first associated with Shapeshift. And are there, is that something that you think might change? I mean, in some ways, just companies are the same. Amazon named a new CEO. It's still Jeff Bezos' company. Bob Iger is still, the helm of Disney, even though he's not the CEO. Is that something that, is problematic in any way when it comes to governance?
Look, I mean, the Jeff Bezos example, I think, is one of my favorites, right? Because if you've followed Amazon closely at all, you know about the situation with this Fire Phone, right? Which was like the most idiotic product maybe ever invented by humans, right? And it was like his baby, and like literally this thing has like weird infrared sensors all over it and stuff, and he just got like too obsessive and like went down a rabbit hole. And in a hierarchical organization where there is someone who has ultimately total control of decisions, if they really care about making a bad decision, they can get that bad decision through, right? Through almost anything, right? And so Jeff Bezos was able to like push through this terrible decision, and there were really, there was no way to stop him, right? And the same thing is true for like a lot of startup founders in Web 2 that have these like, dual equity structures where they've got like, crazy voting rights and like their kids for 100 generations will control the company or like whatever.
Change their whole company name to Meta.
Yeah, whatever it is, right? Stuff like that. But like, but like legitimately, that is not the same thing. Like I do not have control over Synthetix. Like you say like, oh, I'm the face of it, but like in a very real sense, like Jeff Bezos still has control. All of these people still have control. Mark Zuckerberg still has control of the entire company and can do almost anything that he wants. I can't. Like regularly, I'm told, honestly, this is a bad idea. We're not doing it, right? Like it happens to me like on a weekly basis where I'm like, here's a proposal, and everyone's like, sorry, we're not doing that. Like I can't actually push through something. And that's good, because I make dumb decisions all the time. If I was allowed to just decide every single thing in Synthetix, it would be chaos. Like the amount of bad decisions that have been blocked that I would have otherwise done. So, and this is the point, like one person cannot possibly be as effective in like working through something as complex as a DeFi protocol or a Web3 protocol or whatever, as a group of highly engaged owners that have like a sense of meaningful control. It's just not possible.
Yeah.
At least that's my thesis, right? Like that's the decentralized governance thesis.
Yeah, that's great. You get told no.
Yeah,
that's great.
Of course.
Sticking with DAOs, and I know I'm talking, we're kind of talking about the parts of DeFi and crypto that end up amplified and get kind of louder than beyond just the still very niche DeFi space, which, by the way, I'm always saying, it's a large amount of money. It was a large amount of money at the market peak, still a relatively small number of actual, traders and users, something like 2 million or 3 million. But, another example of that is it felt to me like there was a DAO moment where everyone was launching DAOs. Everything was a DAO. It was like, oh, we'll make a DAO. Constitution DAO was probably the most prominent example. Everyone in the room remembers a DAO said, we're going to buy a physical copy of the US Constitution. Didn't work. They got outbid, ironically, by someone who virulently hates crypto. Couldn't write it any better. But then there was a Dune DAO, Spice DAO, and they said, we bought a copy of the Joe Dorowski Dune Bible. We're going to do all kinds of stuff. It was like, oh, turns out you don't own the IP. You can't make it. And it feels like that moment passed a little bit. I mean, I was at, I can't remember which conference it was, but like 8 months ago, and someone was saying, we're actually in fewer DAOs now. Like someone prominent, I think it was someone from Gitcoin, was saying, yeah, I used to be in like 20 DAOs. And then at some point you realize you can't give your time and your work to many more than 3 or 4 of these things. Do you feel that way, that people had a sort of frenzy about joining DAOs, and then it was like, wait a minute, and it kind of cooled?
I mean, that is the story of every single thing that's ever happened in crypto. Like, literally, someone does something, and it's interesting, and then people are like, let's take this to, like, its like ultimate extreme until we have pure chaos, and then it all collapses, and then we're like, okay, what did we do?
Yeah.
Like that is every single thing that's ever happened in crypto. That's the mechanism by which we learn things, right? And so yeah, of course, like there were like hundreds of DAOs popping up because people were like, oh, this is a cool thing to do for that, whatever it was, 3-month period or something, right? I think it's the same thing with yield farming. Like yield farming started and it was cool, and then people just, then you had like vegetable coins, and then it was like every single and then we ran out of emojis. It was like, we need like, how do we get more emojis here, because we have none left, right? So like, the idea that you have this like very low barrier to entry, right, in terms of what you can do and how you can coordinate people is, I think, the thing that allows us to discover very rapidly and iterate and experiment within crypto and learn lessons. We don't always learn them, as effectively as you might like, right? But like we typically will, over a long enough time horizon, learn lessons. And I think a bunch of people learned a lot of stuff about how we do decentralized coordination out of those DAO experiments, out of Constitution DAO and all these things. And some of those DAOs that started are still working, and some of them are kind of dead and whatever. And I think one of the learnings is, yeah, you probably can't be in 100 DAOs. You can't be an active member in 100 DAOs. That's not possible, right? And that's a good thing for all of us to be aware of.
We only have time for a couple more questions, but just real quick, who in this room is a member of a DAO? At least one DAO, raise your hand. Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, maybe a year ago it would have been a lot more hands in that. I want to get your take because we are talking about, governance and especially worrying about, how the tokens are classified, have to hit regulation while we're up here. And actually, just last week we had news very relevant to this conversation, which is the CFTC basically suing a DAO. And the question for DAO governance token holders was like, wait a minute, if this is a security, can they go after every member of the DAO? For what you're doing, how are you thinking about regulation, especially as kind of the rhetoric has, I would say, amped up lately, especially from the SEC?
Yeah, I mean, the SEC wants to regulate everything, not just crypto, right? Like they literally, like Gensler pretty obviously is saying like any financial instrument of any kind, like I want to regulate it, and there's other regulators that are like, excuse me, like we have jurisdiction over this, like there's precedent here. So I think that the fact that there is this like kind of jostling for position between different regulatory bodies is a really interesting situation. And some regulators in different jurisdictions are more or less permissive and open. And I guess for me, like my take on the current situation is that there was a period where it felt like the kind of sufficiently decentralized, discussion, right? Like what happened with Ethereum back in, like the idea that something could be sufficiently decentralized as to kind of fall outside of like SEC, that it feels like we're trying to reel that back in now.
Or they are. Yeah.
Or they are, right? Yeah, exactly. Like the regulators are trying to reel that back in. I don't know if they can. Like I genuinely don't know if they can. It's going to be an interesting kind of battle, I guess, over the next, like year, 2 years to see what happens.
Yeah, it is. Gosh, there's so much more to talk about, but this has been really good. Really interesting to hear the optimism about what's going to happen with governance in the bear market. I think that's a nice takeaway. Can we give Kain a round of applause? Awesome. Good fun, man.